They say give a man a hammer and every problem becomes a nail. And that's not the actual quote. I intentionally misinterpreted it, mistranslated it. But you see why later on. For now, welcome back guys. This is Madness in Nigeria Living and I'm your host, Gisi, and today we are taking a deep dive into the psyche of the Nigerian armor. What is the Nigerian armor? The armor is in me, it's in you, it's in our churches, it's in our school, it's in the government, it's in our crew. The armor is everywhere, and that's the beauty of the armor. Or should I say that's the madness of the armor? Now what is the armor? The armor is a metaphor. Let me describe the metaphor instead of saying what it's a metaphor for. Okay, let's go. You are a parent, a young parent who just came back from work, are tired. Your 3-year-old son, your 3-year-old daughter comes around asking you questions. Hey daddy, why is the orange green? Oh mommy, why is the apple green? Why is the orange yellow? Why is the mango this? Why is this that? Why is the person on the TV? The questions are too much, they're plenty, they're frustrating. So what do you do? What do you do? Spank them, beat them, slap them. You're in a relationship. Your partner is complaining because they are anxious, they feel lonely, they feel they haven't heard from you in a while, you rarely reach out to them, this, that. What do you do? End the relationship. You are the government. The youths are complaining, they are being harassed, the economy is terrible, they are being discriminated upon. They go to protest, they start protesting. What do you do? Shoot them. Is there a pattern there? There's definitely a pattern. The pattern is the Nigerian armor. Instead of you to understand that children are naturally curious, they are learning the world in real time, and so they are curious. And to quench that curiosity, you quench it with answers. You give them things to think about. You give them puzzles. You give them games. You say no. You beat them and silence the natural curiosity. Your partner is in this position that they need reassurance. You say no. They are just asking you too many frustrating questions. Your youth are looking for ways for you to be a good government. You say no, kill them because they are nuisances instead of you giving them new answers. And that's the thing, we don't look for new answers. We are overly reliant on the one we have always known. And for Nigerians, that is usually positively correlated with violence. A friend of mine once said something, that violence is always an answer. If violence doesn't work, you did not use enough violence. And I think Nigerian people in power takes that thing seriously. It's always a faithful approach to finding a solution. Now there are moments where that approach is the right approach and it works. There are moments where standing your ground, being assertive works. But there are also moments where diplomacy is the way to go. But we are overly reliant on the one we know. Now to quote the actual saying from Abraham Maslow, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem becomes a nail. The actual quote shows you a pattern. The only tool you have known is a hammer. That quote is actually called the law of the golden hammer or the law of the instrument, which is a cognitive bias wherein your brain chooses something it has always known as a solution. And you see this pattern a lot in children who grow up from dysfunctional family, people who grow up in stressful environment. And this problem is quite fascinating because it runs deep. And I can give you examples wherein it runs very deep. See the example of confraternities in Nigeria and how it started. When Wole Soyinka and the other 7, I think there were 7 of them, that started Pirate Confraternity. Pirate Confraternity was supposed to be a gathering of students facing the social, economical, and political problems of their time. Yes, when students start growing like that among themselves, there will be chaos. And given how chaotic Nigeria was at that point, you can understand why the confraternity became a little bit more violent, especially with the creation of other confraternities like Buccaneers and the rest. It became a little bit more violent. But how did the government, and when I say the government, I'm not just saying the government like the federal government, the state government, I'm also saying the school. The school, how did they handle it? They handled it by expelling all the students, as opposed to creating a rehabilitation program that is supposed to help the student to unradicalize them back to their original idea, to create an environment that would make the original idea of the confraternity grow, which is a brotherhood, a place wherein students can be themselves and exercise power. No. They were all expelled. And what did that do? These students went back home. A lot of them were disowned by their parents, which is another problem. They entered the street naturally. They became criminals. They started robbing people. They started killing people. And that's how confraternities became what we now know as cultism. And when it got to that point that it was very rampant, what did the government do? They created SARS. And SARS was supposed to be a police task force that would help in the catching of criminals. And so this task force was supposed to not look like task force. And that led to NSAS. Even the NSAS was still treated the same way. Instead of looking at the systemic issues by this SARS, what did they do? They just ended the protest by killing people. They banned Twitter because it was organized on Twitter. Same approach. And it's the same approach that the government have been doing. But it's not just the government. Our parents have been doing it too. And if you really think about it, our first set of bullies we met are usually our parents, are usually the people we look up to, even our pastors. They are the ones that always force their way. And that's why when I originally said the quote, I intentionally misquoted it in a way that portrays the violence as opposed to the over-reliance on the armor. Because Nigerian society is very violent in our approach to solving problems. We are too forceful. Seeing that this is a part of a problem, how can we unlearn it? How can we find a solution out of it? How can we expand our tool set? The first way I believe we can do that is looking at the simple way we are over-reliant on what we have always known. I like to cook. Most people who know me know I like to cook. And when I first started learning how to cook, there was a time I made a stew. The pot of stew was very good. It was very, very good. It was very sweet. It was fruity. And I didn't know why. Like, I tried recooking it. I tried buying different tomatoes. And every time I tried cooking it in the same manner, like I was very accurate with the cooking process, trying to recreate it. It never tasted the same. Then one day I went to Google, how can you make your tomato stew sweet? That was like 2018. Can you make your tomato stew sweet? And I saw on Google that there are a lot of things that affect the taste of tomato. One of them being the acidity of the tomato. You can easily reduce it by adding something like baking soda or sugar. I tried baking soda. Baking soda almost eliminates the acidity and it makes it too sugary. I don't like it. I prefer sugar. Just a little bit of sugar in the stew will reduce the acidity and makes it a bit sweeter. And I was like, perfect. I've learned this thing. So beautiful. Then when I went back to school, because I learned it during the holiday, when I went back to school and I cooked, my friends refused to eat the food. Why? Because you're not supposed to add sugar to a stew. It's like, I was explaining the science, that the science is sound. It's not about just putting sugar. If anything, I could have used baking soda, but this is why. And they're like, nah, that's not how you make a stew. And that's the thing, that over-reliance on this is how it has always been done. We don't even pause to question, why was it always done that way? Sometimes it was done that way because of ignorance. People did not know any better. I just thought of an example of it being done out of ignorance, which is, imagine you grew up in a society wherein the leader of the society, the patriarch, was allergic to a particular food. And as at that time in society, food allergy wasn't a known thing. We always know that when this person ate it, this person started dying. What do? You banned that food. And because you have banned that food and generations have grown later on, that food will become villainized. But instead of now unlearning, people will be like, oh, this is our culture, this is how it has always been. Now I'm not telling you abandon culture. I'm saying try to understand what motivated this culture, what motivated this thought process. When you see your parents beating you, how did it feel for you? And now you are older and you are doing the same because that's how it has always been done. Why? Why not pause and unlearn? For me as an individual, one way I unlearned it was, I started saying that, okay, there are times I want to achieve B. In the process of achieving B, I need to first achieve A. As I'm trying to navigate A, I start seeing it moving away from, instead of going towards B, start going towards 1, 2, 3, 0, which is completely different from what I want. I started asking people, how can you go about it? When I was in my year 2, I remember talking to a final year student, a way older lady, and she was telling me the importance of saying sorry. As at that point in my life, I would never say sorry. I'm wrong, I'm right, it doesn't matter, I'm not saying sorry. And it was taking away, it was alienating from what I wanted, which is building healthy relationships. And that's where the unlearning process started. It's just, okay, how can I learn something else? And in the unlearning process and with a lot of reading, I came across trauma responses for interpersonal relationship called CPTSD. And I saw that I was a fight type. I was the type that fight first. But in unlearning the fight type and understanding that every type has its benefits, they have their benefit in individual case scenarios, I started adapting the other type. But I also learned something in the process. I started learning to see the pattern in other people. And I saw the patterns in a lot of people that grew up in the same environment I grew up in, especially a lot of guys. And I started saying, how this negatively affects our relationship. This over-reliance on something that is not necessarily bad. The armor is not necessarily bad. The problem is when you use the armor instead of a screwdriver. That's when the armor becomes bad. And if we as individuals don't unlearn all these patterns and find a more diverse tool set in communication, in conflict resolution, in planning, in solution finding, in loving, if we don't find more tool set, if we don't find new ways to parent, if we don't find new ways to build friendship, we will repeat the same pattern, the same cyclical pattern. And that pattern becomes generational trauma. And Nigeria, whether we like it or not, is very traumatic. And we have had this generational trauma. This trauma that has been so linked with our culture that we can't separate it from our culture anymore. We have to unlearn it. Because if we as individuals don't unlearn it, the schools will not unlearn it. The churches will not unlearn it. The government will not unlearn it, because the individuals make up the government. The individuals make up the schools. The individuals make up the churches, the mosques. These are individuals that overly rely on what they have always known. And that's why we need to learn new ways. We need to unlearn and learn new ways. And that's the only way we can, for once, drop the hammer and use a screwdriver. Drop the screwdriver and use a gun. Drop the gun and use a knife. It all depends on the problem at hand. And that's it for today, guys. Try to unlearn what you have always known, especially when it isn't working for you. Try to ask around. Try to see new ways you can approach these things. And yeah, it's worth it. It's worth it. Thank you once again for coming to today's episode. We look forward to seeing you same time next week, Wednesday. Tell a friend, tell a friend, tell a friend, tell a friend. Oh yeah.